Hello and welcome to Just Plain Tech. What is today's question, you ask? I don't think you asked it because it's right down the title. But today's question is, what is Linux? What is it and what does it do? All right, let's get this out of the way. No, Linux is not just a boring command line operating system for boring developers like me. Linux is actually an operating system, well, hundreds if not thousands of different operating systems that have many uses and purposes. Like some could be meant for coding, programming, some could be meant for video editing, some for games, and some for just whatever you want it to be for. And but there is more than one Linux operating system. And Linux operating systems are called distributions or distros for short. Now, a distro is a distribution of Linux. It's basically a Linux operating system. So, Linux does has a graphical interface. So, most Linux distributions at least have a graphical interface. So you can actually, yes, there's a mouse and apps and everything that you can do on it. You can even do more than you can on Windows. And let's just say this, Linux is absolutely free. No activation fees, free to download, free. And at least most distributions are free. And almost like 99% of the software is free, completely free. It's not like the dumb trial version you'd get on your phone or your computer. It's like the actual thing for free. And how it works is, since Linux is open source, anyone can develop software for Linux or even modify the Linux system itself. Like, yeah, believe me when I say this, I'm not kidding. You like, say if you found a bug in a Linux system, you can actually fix it yourself, and then it will be fixed for everybody using that Linux distribution. And this is the part that everybody loves. You are not limited by Microsoft's user agreements or Apple's or Google's agreements. You can literally do whatever you want. You can even remove built-in packages. You can even make another Linux distribution based off whatever distribution you want. You can take any Linux system you want and make another distro that is based off it. Well, most of you probably won't do that. Maybe some of you are interested in doing that. You can literally do anything. You can actually skim it down. You can literally remove almost everything and skim it down to the point where it could run on a smart toaster. If you want to put Linux on your toaster for some reason, you can actually do that, as long as it's a toaster that, like a smart toaster with a screen or something. Anyway, so in today's video, we're going to be going over three things. One, distributions, or distros for short. Two, desktop interfaces. Yes, Linux has many different desktop interfaces you can use. You don't have to pick just one, like the boring, dark, gloomy Windows 10 interface. So, one, distros. Two, desktop interfaces. And three is package managers. While a lot of distributions have the same desktop interface or package manager or something. Every Linux distribution is different in its own way. So one, we're going to talk about distros. All right. So each Linux distribution has a different purpose or thing it's meant to do. And every distribution is different from another. Maybe not completely different from each other, but they're different in a way. If you've been looking at Linux on the internet, you might have stumbled across Ubuntu. Ubuntu is the most popular Linux distribution. Some people prefer to pronounce it Ubuntu, but I like calling it Ubuntu just because it sounds better. And yeah, Ubuntu is the most popular distro, but Ubuntu was not its own thing. It's obviously a Linux distribution based off another Linux distribution called Debian. Now, Debian was an original distribution. It had its own package manager and its own set of tools and everything. It was built completely from the kernel. Which brings me to the point. So every operating system needs a kernel to run on. The kernel is like the command line under the desktop interface. So, let's say your phone has a kernel running under Android or iOS. Windows has a kernel, and Linux has a kernel. There's a new version of the Linux kernel every 6 months. There's a new version every 6 months. And each version of the Linux kernel is only supported until the next one comes out, with an exception to the long-term support kernel, short LTS for short. LTS kernels come out every 2 years, and they have a 5-year support. 5 years of support. So, yeah, each Linux distribution, you can probably find, if they don't tell you on the website, you can probably find it somewhere on the internet. You can find out which version of the Linux kernel it runs on top of. And don't worry, most distributions, at least the ones I've used, you don't have to install the kernel separately. It will install everything for you. Most of them just have a graphical interface, so it has an easy install process, and you don't need that much technical skills to do it. Yeah. So, if you want the long-term support kernel is more stable than the rolling release kernel that comes out every 6 months. So, if you want something with new features and everything and experimental stuff, you can try one of the rolling release distributions, something based off the rolling release kernel. But if you want something with maybe a little less features but more stable and less buggy, then the long-term support kernel is the thing for you, which I think most people would probably like the long-term support. In my case, I like the long-term support kernel. It's just more stable. All right. Okay. So another thing is derivatives. Okay. So say how Ubuntu is based off Debian. That makes Ubuntu a derivative of Debian. So, and then for example, another popular Linux distribution known as Linux Mint is a derivative of Ubuntu. So Linux Mint is a derivative of Ubuntu, which is a derivative of Debian. And Debian and Ubuntu have a ton of derivatives. There are a ton of Linux distributions derived from Debian and Ubuntu. All right, moving on to number 2, desktop interfaces. Unlike Windows, Chromebook, and Mac, most Linux distributions actually give you the ability to choose which desktop environment you want your Linux distribution to come with. For example, what you want your desktop to look like. And there are tons of different desktop environments. Some Linux distributions actually come with just the bare bones command line, nothing but the kernel itself. So it's just a Linux kernel where you can then install a graphical interface of your choice. For example, one of the most popular distros is Arch Linux. It's just a Linux kernel, and you can install a desktop interface on it. Lots of people like Arch Linux. If you're not too tech savvy or you're not a developer, I wouldn't recommend Arch Linux because it might be way too tricky for you. But if you're willing to like completely create your distribution, your desktop from scratch, and you like playing around with things and making your own system, Arch Linux is the thing for you. All right. Anyway, now getting into desktop interfaces, Ubuntu does not give you the option to choose. It just comes with one, although kind of lets you choose. Not really, but there are older versions of Ubuntu run the Unity desktop, which is a desktop environment created by Canonical, which is the company that maintains Ubuntu. Now, but newer versions, specifically 17.10 and up, have the GNOME desktop, GNOME 3, which is actually used by a lot of distributions. I kind of think they should have just stuck with Unity because putting GNOME on there just makes Ubuntu look like everything else. Alright. But so there are other distributions such as Debian and Linux Mint. They actually let you choose which desktop environment you would like to run. Like when you download it. Linux Mint has the Cinnamon desktop environment, which has a nice look. It's sleek. It's got a lot of customization options. Then Linux Mint also gives you Mate, which is it's a little more basic. It looks more like it's a fork of GNOME too, so it's a little more of a basic. It's more of a basic desktop interface, not as sleek and modern looking as Cinnamon maybe. And XFCE. Now XFCE is so Cinnamon is a pretty heavy desktop environment. Mate is kind of in the middle, and then XFCE is light. It's a lightweight desktop environment. Not like very few customization options, but stable and working really well. For example, this is a Linux distribution called Slackware running the XFCE desktop environment. So as you can see, it's a pretty basic stuff. It is fast though. Works just fine. But then again, it has a pretty basic, simple layout. Now, if you want I don't have time to show you all desktop environments, but if you want something even lighter than XFCE, LXDE is considered the most popular lightweight, the lightest Linux desktop environment that is popular. Out of all the popular ones, LXDE is definitely the lightest. It's like if you have a high-end PC, Cinnamon and GNOME might might run fine. But if you have maybe a older PC, then you might want to go with either Mate, XFCE, or LXDE. And we're also going to go over another one called KDE. Now, KDE is considered the best. I mean, kind of like them all, but KDE is really, it looks very high tech. It's got a nice interface, and everything is so efficient and reflective. Like, it's such, I can't even explain it. It's such nice. Tons of customization options, everything. KDE is amazing. And here's the best part. Unlike Cinnamon and GNOME, KDE is actually lightweight. Well, I mean, all the utilities it comes with it adds up to about 10 gigabytes, but it does run very well on older computers. For example, here, I'll just show you. Anyway, again, this is on Slackware. So Slackware is one of those Linux distributions where it, say like Linux Mint. If you want Linux Mint Cinnamon and Linux Mint Mate, you'd have to install both of them separately. But Slackware comes with two desktop interfaces, KDE, which is the awesome one, and then XFCE, which is the more lightweight one. All right? So, and here, just let me show you. Slackware actually boots into the kernel. See, this is Slackware in the Linux kernel. If I type in start X, it will start KDE. If I type in start XFCE4, it will start XFCE. Anyway, we're going to start KDE. It should take a little bit longer to load than XFCE, but overall it has a really nice look. Here we are. So if you are a fan of widgets, KDE has a lot of widgets. Say like, look at this, clock, digital clock. I can even add widgets. Watch, like this. And I can scroll over to the bouncy ball. Yes, you can even drag and bounce around a bouncy ball. It's fun to play around with. Anyway, don't get too sidetracked there, but it has a lot of nice, like its menu and stuff. And this is on an old computer, so it's actually sleek, modern, robust, everything. And it actually runs very well on an older PC, unlike GNOME, which is so darn heavy. Anyway, a lot of people like KDE. That's a pretty good one. All right, let's not take too long here. Now, moving on to number 3. Just a minute. Package managers. All right. Every Linux distribution comes with a package manager. Say Ubuntu or Debian and Linux Mint and all the distributions based off those ones, derivatives, whatever. They come with the apt package manager, spelled APT, stands for Advanced Package Tools. And apt has the most. It prides the most in its repository. You can type in sudo apt-get install, then package name, whatever you want, in a terminal, and it will easily do it. And most distributions with apt come with a software manager and Synaptic. Some of them even come with both. Synaptic is a graphical package manager. It's like a graphical app front end for the command line apt package manager. And if your distro doesn't come with, if you know your distro uses apt but it doesn't have synaptic, you can just type in sudo apt-get install synaptic, and boom, it will make it a lot easier. And now we're gonna go over another Linux distribution package manager called Yum. So Yum is also a package manager. It's used in the Fedora project, okay? And Fedora is a Linux distribution. I'm pretty sure it's an original and came with the Yum package manager. Now, you may have heard of the... Wait just a minute. You may have heard of the company Red Hat. And Red Hat made their own Linux distribution, Red Hat Enterprise Linux. It's a operating system meant for enterprise, although if you would like, you can download it at home, obviously. But you do need a Red Hat membership, which if you don't want to do that, you could get Fedora. Or there's also, like Red Hat is a derivative of Fedora, CentOS, spelled CentOS. It's not pronounced that way. It's CentOS. Remember, CentOS is a derivative of Red Hat, and CentOS stands for Community Enterprise Operating System. And yeah, so CentOS uses the same package manager as Red Hat and Fedora, uses Yum, although instead of having Red Hat or Fedora services, it has CentOS services. And the last one we're going to talk about is Package Tool, PKG Tool. It's the package manager that comes with Slackware, the distro I'm using right here. Now, Slackware does not come with a graphical store, but you can install that. Like, for example, on this Slackware system, I have installed 2 stores. This is gslapt, which slapt is spelled S-L-A-P-T. So it's basically kind of apt, advanced package tools, but it's meant for Slackware repositories. So this is gslapt, which is basically synaptic package manager, but for Slackware, pretty much. And now, SBO package is an additional package manager that you can add. SBO package is an additional package manager that you can add to Slackware. It's the package manager for slackbuilds.org. And SBO package doesn't do a very good job of installing. It wants you to install the dependencies on your own, which is such a pain. But fear not. There is something called SBO UI, which is a user interface for SBO package, and it does not require you to install the dependencies, but to install SBO UI through SBO package, you do need one dependency. So it's not that bad. It's just one extra dependency to install. libconf libconfig, something like that. And once you get SBO UI installed, it will install the dependencies for you. This is SBO UI right here, and it definitely has a lot more options than gslapt does. There's a lot more options of stuff to install on SBO UI than on gslapt. But yeah, so that was kind of just skimming the surface of the Linux world. I only described what Debian, Debian and Ubuntu Linux Mint based distros, Red Hat, Fedora CentOS based distros, and Slackware. There are tons of more Linux distributions out there with lots more package managers. All right, so Linux is definitely an upgrade from Windows and a lot easier to learn, and you can install a software store so free, and the desktop interfaces look nice. And you ever went to the Microsoft store to find everything costs money? So annoying, right? I agree. All right. So that's basically a basic intro to Linux. Thank you for watching. Switch to Linux, and we'll see you in the next episode.